Now coming to the whatever we do have an ecological footprint. That means if you are using a pen for writing, that has an ecological footprint. If we are wearing clothes, it has its own ecological footprint. Ecological footprint is basically based on the land and water area which is required to produce our resources which we are using in every day-to-day life. However, the earth has certain capacity to produce whatever we are utilizing. The earth capacity is termed as biocapacity, which is the biologically productive area to reproduce the resources we are consuming as human. The global footprint network calculates the ecological footprint of human activity. We will do the ecological footprint calculation of ourselves designed by the global footprint network. Okay. It is worth mentioning here that about 17% of world population consumes about the 80% of the resources which the world possesses. That means there is a huge disparity in consumption and liability to the environment. At present, what we are consuming is more than what the earth can produce every year. That means earth has a certain capacity to reproduce itself when we are extracting resources from the earth. According to the global footprint network, we are using 1.7 earth per year. That means whatever the resources we are consuming every year, 1.7 earth is required to reproduce those resources in a 1 year. That means we are capitalizing on our natural resources in such a way that we are investing our we are spending our most of the useful resources which should be used in the future. Okay. The global footprint network also calculates the earth overshoot day every year, which means the day when we are capitalizing on the year's resources which can be regenerated in 1 year. In 2021, it was the 29th of June when we have utilized the whole of the resources which will be generated in 1 year. World capacity, biocapacity is, that means, systematically decreasing every year. Now we will go to the video and watch how the ecological footprint human activity are causing and how we are fitting into our planet. Let's go to the video.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
Hi, Alex here. What is our ecological footprint? Today I'm going to use illustration to explain what it is and how we fit our planet. So let's get drawing. This is what we need to provide the resources we use and to absorb the waste we produce. 1.5 planets. So that means that it takes about
Now I would like to mention here that the video is old, and at that point of the time we were using 1.5 planets every year, but now it has increased to the 1.7 Earth per year.
A year and a half for our planet to regenerate what we use in a year. The Global Footprint Network calculates every year Earth overshoot day, and in 2013 it was on August 19th. So that was the day when we finished using our resources for the year. So think about it as a bank account. For the first 7 months and 20 days, we lived on our annual revenue. After that, we spent our capital. Seems like there's something wrong with that math. Our ecological footprint measures how much land and water area we need to produce the resources we use, things like energy, food, land for settlements, timber, seafood, and to absorb the waste we generate. Our biocapacity is the amount of biologically productive area that is available to provide the resources we use and to absorb the waste. So we can compare footprint and biocapacity to see if we are well balanced or not. So let's dig into that a little. I live in Canada, and our ecological footprint in 2007, that was published in 2010, was 7.01, meaning that to provide what we consume every year, we need 7.01 global hectares per person. But we live in a huge country, and our biocapacity was actually 14.92 global hectares per person. So if we do the math, the difference was 7.91, which means that technically we are an ecological creditor country. Does that mean that it's okay to consume as much as we do? Well, not really, because if the whole world lived like us, we would need more than 4 planets to produce the resources we use and to absorb the waste, because not every nation has so much land, such huge forests, and so many other natural resources. The United States has a footprint of 8 and a biocapacity of 3.87, so the difference is minus 4.13. So they are a big ecological debtor country. This is actually the case of most developed countries. Among the smaller footprints is the Democratic Republic of the Congo with 0.75. Although it's not an economically rich country at all, it has a biocapacity of 2.76. So you see that it's also an ecological creditor country with a difference of 2.01. The Global Footprint Network published the footprint in low, middle, and high-income countries between 1961 and 2008. This is the world's average biocapacity. What do you notice? Yeah, it is systematically decreasing. So basically the story reads, the wealthier people are, the bigger the footprint. So when we can afford it, it's hard to resist, I guess. And this is also confirmed by the fact that 17% of the world's population consumes 80% of the world's resources. So the main problem is not the absolute lack of resources, it's the fact that our global consumption is extremely uneven and inefficient. So these were footprints for nations, but you can also measure the ecological footprint of an individual, a city, a business, or all of humanity to assess our pressure on the planet. So I calculated my own ecological footprint on the Global Footprint Network website, and it is about 5.5. So why is it significantly less than Canada's footprint of 7? Well, mostly thanks to my lifestyle. I rarely eat meat, I drive very little, I live in a highly energy efficient house, etc. So you can go and calculate your own personal footprint if you like. I included the link in the description below. So the ecological footprint is a really useful way of understanding our relationship to the planet and how the ways in which we live impact our ability to survive and thrive as a race over time. So try it, you may find it interesting. As usual, here are the key points to keep in mind. Humanity uses more resources than the Earth provides. The main problem is not the absolute lack of resources, it's the fact that our global consumption is unevenly distributed, that it favors only a few, and that it's also extremely inefficient. And the ecological footprint is a great tool to assess the pressure that we put on the planet. Basically, it helps us keep the big picture in mind and not get lost in the details.
Okay, let's come back to the slide. I hope now ecological footprint concept is clear to you, all of you. Now we will do a small activity of calculating the ecological footprint of ourselves. Okay, this is the link I am posting in the chat box for you to calculate your ecological footprint. Yeah, I have provided link in the chat box. I request all of you to go back and check on this link and calculate of your ecological footprint and write down your scores here so that we can understand how and where we understand stand on the ecological footprint of ourselves. We have 10 minutes time and we can do it earliest possible. I request you to do it on earliest possible. I hope all of you have calculated your ecological footprint. Please comment your score here in chat box. I hope all of you have taken the exercise and we can move forward. Thank you all for sharing your results. Okay, participants are still sharing the results, so we can wait for some time. Okay, we, now we shall move forward. And from the results, I can say that none of us having less than one ecological footprint. That means all of us are using more than one. It interprets that all of us are using resources which Earth cannot generate in 1 year. That means Earth requires more than 1 year to produce it. 36% of participants having ecological footprint between 2 to 4. That means 36% of humans of us are utilizing the resources which Earth can generate between 2 to 4 years, but we are utilizing it in only 1 year. However, rest of the participants, which constitute 64%, are using the resources which Earth can generate in 4 years. That means major population is using the resources which Earth can generate in more than 4 years. This shows how we are using our Earth resources in a very inefficient manner. However, we can inculcate some of the practices in daily life so that we can use products which have the less ecological footprint. Now, coming further, carbon footprint is a small part of, or you can say carbon footprint is a subset of ecological footprint. Whatever we are activities doing that have also a significant portion to the carbon footprint. Now, we can say that whatever activities we do releases some of the greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, ozone, nitrous oxide, and some oxides of sulfur into the atmosphere, which induces the ecological footprint. Greenhouse gases absorb and emit the infrared radiations, and these infrared radiations are causing some heat trapping activities in the atmosphere. Water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, ozone are the most abundant greenhouse gases in the Earth atmosphere. However, their percentage varies with the season and the weather conditions in the local area. Water vapor percentage varies from 36% to 72% depending upon the seasonality and the weather condition. If it is rainy season, then the water vapor percentage can go up to 72% in GHG, or in the summer time it can reduce up to 36%. However, similarly, CO2 concentration varies from 9 to 26% depending upon the season. Methane and ozone constitute about 4 to 9% and 3 to 7% respectively to the GHG proportion in the atmosphere. See, all the GHG gases have some impact on the carbon footprint. So what we do, for the sake of ease of understanding and comparison, we calculate all the carbon footprint in terms of CO2 equivalent. We provide one of the impact factor relative to the carbon dioxide to the other GHG gases and calculate it is on based on the 100-year of timeline. 100-year of timeline is considered as the human life on the Earth. According to United Nations Environmental Protection Agency report of 2020, about 10% of earners of the world have the equivalent carbon footprint to the rest 90%. That means almost top 10% of the world population is polluting equivalent to the rest of 90% of the world population. The report says that world average carbon footprint is about 5 metric ton CO2 equivalent. However, for keeping the world atmosphere temperature in check, that means 1.5 degrees Celsius, less than 1.5 degrees Celsius rise in global temperature, it is required to have a global carbon footprint of per capita of 2 metric ton CO2 equivalent. Now it's time to go to the video and watch how illustration on carbon footprint. We can learn a lot from that video.
Of course, everyone right now is thinking a lot about climate change, and it's becoming a lot more real and severe.
Hi folks, Alex here. This is pure carbon. So technically, this is a carbon footprint, right? Well, sort of. In this video, we're going to explain what we really mean by carbon footprint, how it is calculated, why we need to reduce it, and how to reduce it. Okay, let's get drawing. In a previous video, I explained what is our ecological footprint. In a nutshell, it is how much land and water area we need to produce the resources we use and to absorb our waste. Here is a link to that video if you haven't seen it. One resource that we use a lot of is carbon, mostly from the burning of fossil fuels. Investments, meaning in a previous video, land and water area we need to produce the resources we use and to absorb our waste. Here is a link to that video if you haven't seen it. One resource that we use a lot of is carbon, mostly from the burning of fossil fuels. Now, this is a cute drawing, but truly, this is what fossil fuels extraction looks like nowadays. When we do that, it produces greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide. There are other greenhouse gases, but to keep it simple and easy to compare, we count it as CO2 equivalent. So part of our ecological footprint is actually our carbon footprint. It is the amount of CO2 equivalent that is released into the atmosphere as a result of our activities. In my case, about half my ecological footprint is carbon, and worldwide it is about 60%. We can also calculate the carbon footprint of the world, a country, a business, an individual, an event, a product, etc. For example, when we travel with a vehicle that burns fossil fuels, it clearly releases carbon into the atmosphere. If I use an electric vehicle, then the question is, how is the electricity produced? In the United States and China, for instance, the two countries with the largest carbon footprint, about 65% of the electricity is produced from fossil fuels. So there is a good chance that even an electric car generates a lot of carbon dioxide. But I'm already getting into how the carbon footprint is calculated. So how do we do that? Well, you're going to need a pen, a notebook, a calculator. No, I'm kidding. Calculating your carbon footprint is like many other things nowadays. There is a website for it. If you are in the US, I recommend this one. If you are in the UK, I recommend this one. If you are anywhere else, I recommend this one. Essentially, you enter how much energy it takes to heat your home, how much driving and flying you do, how much money you spend on food, clothes, technology, investments, etc. And the engine behind it translates everything into how many metric tons of carbon equivalent that is. Adding it all up at the end, you get your carbon footprint. Mine is 8.63. It is significantly lower than the average in Canada, where I live, but you can see that it is significantly higher than the world's average and, more importantly, to the worldwide target. Where does this target come from? The scientific community agrees that when we use fossil fuel, it releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which makes its temperature rise. We have emitted so much of these greenhouse gases over the past century that the Earth is getting warmer than it has been over the past 400,000 years. We found that out by drilling ice cores in Antarctica, which is the topic of another video you can watch if you like. So we need to reduce our emissions, which means we need to reduce our carbon footprint. How do we do that? One option is carbon offsets. This means paying a certain amount of money, depending on your emissions, that will go towards a program designed to reduce the same amount of carbon emissions somewhere else in the world, either by planting trees, building a wind farm, a solar power plant, etc. When you calculate your carbon footprint, some calculators will give you a link to offset your carbon emissions. If I choose this one, for instance, it would cost me less than $100 Canadian to offset my carbon emissions for the entire year. Great deal, right? But here is the rub. Planting trees does not make airplanes fly. Yet. So offsetting does not keep the fossil fuels, the carbon, in the ground. It just transfers the problem onto another project somewhere else in the world while we keep extracting them. In a way, it is like killing panda bears and donating to WWF to protect them. Carbon offsets should be seen as a great way to fund tree planting and renewable energy projects around the world in order to transition away from fossil fuels, not as a long-term solution. The best way to reduce my carbon footprint is to address its root causes, so the carbon is not extracted in the first place. I can live in a smaller home, improve its insulation, heat it with geothermal energy, for instance, use less electricity, have the electricity I use produced from renewable energy, walk and bike to drive less with my car. When I do drive, use a very efficient vehicle, maybe an electric vehicle, given that the electricity is mostly hydro where I live, fly less, eat less meat, especially beef, which generates a lot of carbon emissions. And finally, one we don't talk about very often, be smart with my investments, meaning the money I give to financial institutions through my mortgage and insurance products. Why? Because most banking and finance organizations invest my money into fossil fuels. According to carbonfootprint.com, if I cut my mortgage, it would reduce my total annual carbon footprint by 2 metric tons, 20% of my total carbon footprint. Finally, according to the 2020 GAP report published by UNEP, the 10% part of the population that earns the most money have just about the same collective carbon footprint as the other 90%. So it is our entire system that is dysfunctional. And at the end of the day, the best way to reduce our carbon footprint is to take action and to vote for those who will help create the new systems that we need. If you calculated your carbon footprint as well and feel comfortable sharing it, please let me know in the comments below.
Okay. Now let's come back to do one more activity on carbon footprint calculation. I'm sharing one more link to you in chat box for calculating your personal carbon footprint. Please do, everyone. I have already shared you the link, and you can calculate your personal carbon footprint from this link. And please share your results here. Participants, we have only 6 minutes for the session. Please calculate your carbon footprint as soon as possible. Participants, I think everyone has calculated their carbon footprint, and we can move further. Before going to the results, I have segregated the results in 3 sections. One section is less than 2 metric ton CO2 equivalent, which is required carbon footprint for the cleaner environment. And the second one is in between 2 metric ton to 5 metric ton CO2 equivalent. And the third one is more than 5 metric ton CO2 equivalent per person. The result is only 20% of participants have less than 2 metric ton CO2 equivalent carbon footprint, and majority of our participants have their carbon footprint between 2 to 5 metric ton CO2 equivalent, that is 60%. And 20% of our participants have more than 5 metric ton CO2 equivalent their personal carbon footprint. With this activity, I hope you have learned how to calculate your carbon footprint and ecological footprint at individual level. I really hope that you will try to reduce your ecological and carbon footprint by inculcating some of the lifestyles which are familiar with the nature's existence. Thank you. If you have any question, you can ask.
I think the session is over. So thank you, Mr. Abhijit Anand, for your great presentation. And thank you for all the participants who are attending the webinar. So please continue. We can resume tomorrow at 9:30. And this is the end of this session today. Thank you.